Welcome to the Get Fit Guys quick and dirty tips to slim down and shape up. Today, we're going to talk about muscle cramps, which can be incredibly frustrating. You're in the middle of a workout when, bam, your muscles suddenly and powerfully seize up and rebel against anything your brain tells them to do. Or perhaps they just march off into their own tiny, twitching song and dance routine, leaving you unable to effectively do your exercise. The truth is, cramping during exercise can go far beyond simply being dehydrated and grabbing a glass of water to make the cramps go away. So in this episode, you'll learn what causes cramps, how to avoid cramps, and the 5 ways to stop cramping during exercise. The first possible cause of cramping is a lack of fitness. This is the type of cramp you might get during a pickup basketball game, day of snow skiing, or a 5K run. The reasoning goes something like this. During competition or intense exercise, you sometimes push yourself much harder than you normally do in training, and your muscles are subjected to a much stronger force of contraction than they're used to. As a result, the muscles go into a state of protective spasm. While this is certainly a plausible reason for cramping, it obviously doesn't apply to people who aren't engaged in high-intensity competition or training. But this type of cramping does have a very basic solution. Get more fit. If you're constantly cramping during competition or hard training, then begin weight training, performing cardiovascular intervals, and subjecting your muscles to higher degrees of stress. The second cause of cramping could be dehydration. The contraction of a muscle is based on a delicate electrical balance within the muscle itself. The movement of compounds like potassium, magnesium, sodium, and calcium in and out of the muscle area is how electrical charges are maintained within your muscles. And each of these electrical compounds move in a body fluid that's primarily comprised of water. But when the balances of these compounds is not ideal, or when the fluid in which they move is depleted, the muscles cannot properly carry a charge and contract. So the muscles either produce a very weak contraction, or they produce a contraction that will not relax, a cramp. Many folks only address half of this equation. If they experience cramping during exercise, they head to the water fountain or begin gulping down copious amounts of water from their sports bottle, but neglect taking in salts or electrolytes. Even if you have adequate water on board, you may not have proper levels of sodium, magnesium, calcium, potassium. But before you rush off to get your hands on a sports drink, you may want to read a recent blog post I wrote about a popular sports drink over at my blog, bengreenfieldfitness.com. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. The takeaway message of the post is this, that most people get enough sugar and salt, and unless you're a highly active individual or a serious athlete, the cause of your cramps is more likely to be dehydration or lack of water than inadequate salt intake. The next possible cause of cramping is a lack of flexibility. In theory, very, very tight muscles may be more likely to cramp. For example, if you sit at a desk all day without standing up and walking around, then your hip flexors are in a shortened position for a long time. This can produce inflexible, chronically shortened hip flexors that may be more likely to seize up and cramp when your brain tells them to contract. The solution to this is simple. If you're constantly cramping in a specific muscle group, then begin stretching that muscle group. To actually improve flexibility in a muscle, you must hold a stretch for about 6 seconds and preferably closer to 20 seconds. I'll put a link in the show notes to the exact stretches that I personally do on a daily basis. So for the example of the hip flexor, for every hour that you sit, you could stand into a 20-second lunging hip flexor stretch in which you get into a lunge position and reach for the sky. Finally, let's talk about whether drinking pickle juice could actually help muscle cramps. A very interesting study at Brigham Young University actually forced exercising and dehydrated individuals into a muscle cramp, then tested whether tasting an incredibly salty solution, in this case pickle juice, could reverse the cramp. Amazingly, the pickle juice worked in just a few seconds. Even more amazingly, these few seconds weren't long enough for the salts in the pickle juice to actually reach the muscle. So the researchers hypothesized that the taste of a salty substance sends a message to the brain to actually inhibit the firing of the nerves that can cause a muscle to cramp. Finally, a practical use for pickle juice. So ultimately, here are the 5 ways to stop cramping during exercise. Number 1, just get into shape. Number 2, stay hydrated. Number 3, if you exercise or sweat a lot, use electrolytes. Number 4, keep regularly cramping muscles flexible. Number 5, taste something very salty. If you have your own cramping avoidance tips that you've discovered, then why not leave them as a discussion on the Get Fit Guy Facebook page? Just go to facebook.com